The next task is to prepare the rails and the risers or lifters. The rails are pretty easy. They're meant to be 166 millimeters. They can be slightly shorter than that, but no longer. Now they're probably, well, these ones are, they're pretty rough at the end here where it's been hacksawed. I'm just going to clean up those edges with a file. Just taking the burr off the edge. I might actually even get a bigger flat file and just clean up the top and bottom as well. It's important to put a little, to make sure that these burrs are cleaned off, because they actually won't go into the plastic part. Just going to get a flat file. It is much easier to do this in a vise, but I'm just going to do it by hand rather than shift over to the vise. Now just be really careful of this edge. This is your bearing edge, so any little nicks that you put into this will actually translate into your parts. We want to make sure that we file this square as well. I don't think this one is quite square. If it looks like it's not quite square, it's probably a good idea just to get a set square onto it and check it out, remark it and file down to the marked line. Now with these ones, the top edge is actually going to be visible, so it's really important that at least that when we do this, that one of the ends is really nice and clean. It's highly visible, so I really want this one to be beautifully finished. In fact, it's probably best to really nicely finish both of them, because you'll end up, like me, forgetting which end is which and ending up with the polished one at the bottom. So I'm just going to clean up both of these ends. So they're now done. One thing we just need to make sure of is that these two little rails that we've got here have a really smooth finish especially on this corner, the outer corner of the part. It doesn't really matter on that face, but this one feels quite rough. So I'm just going to grab my wet and dry and give those a bit of a rub down. On this. So I'm just doing this in a linear fashion, just so that the grain of the finish is going in one direction. I might just give that corner a bit of a wipe as well on this. You just got to be gentle with the aluminium, because it does tend to sand away pretty quickly and easily. So I'll do this other side now. And the next thing we need to do is just to prepare these two lifters for attaching to the bearing carriage at one end and the X-axis assembly at the other. And we've got two jigs, one that says 21.7 on it and the other one that says 18. Now I'm just going to put the two shorter rails aside because we don't want to confuse those in this process. Doesn't really matter, the holes would be out of the functional area anyway, but better to not be confused. So again, we're just going to use these little drilling jigs. I'm just going to get my little angle block here and pop that over the edge like that. Put a 3mm drill bit in the drill and slot that down in there. Now you just got to make sure that it is actually really seated at the end there, otherwise you'll get the hole in the wrong spot. That's looking good. Sometimes this does actually walk. It can be a good idea to actually sit this edge up against something solid, just so that it doesn't walk that way with the travel of the drill bit. I'm making sure that I'm holding it really tightly, but sometimes that still doesn't work. There we go. And I'm going to put the other one at the other end. Might actually put just a little tip of olive oil on the end of this. Aluminium does gum up the drill bit. There we go. Just making sure that those holes have actually gone through the centre. This one looks like it's slightly off to one side. And we can actually correct that just by putting the drill bit in and giving it a bit of a twist to the side that it needs correcting to. So I'm going to do the second one. So there's just one more job to do to clean these up and finish these off. We actually have to make a little bit of an easement in here. We've got to slot it so that a round head screw can fit in there and not foul against the edge of the machine. So I'm just going to grab this as verniers and measure 4.5 mil. And lock that in place. And I'm just going to scribe a little line on here. On here. Oops. Keeping it as steady as possible. Technically we probably should have done this before putting the holes in, but it is difficult to know where the holes are going to go. So now we need to file a slot down to those marks, and it needs to be at least, well, it has to, if I put that in there, this will demonstrate. We've got to have an easement of at least, you know, 1/2 mil either side of the buttonhead screws that we're going to put in there. So I'm just going to make a mark 2 mil either side of that hole. So it makes 7 mil overall. So just mark a line here. So that is to there, and there, and 7 mil, I think. Now it can be a little bit larger than that. This is pretty right. So if I zero that again, turn that off, the width of this file is fortunately about right for doing these slots. So I'm just going to use this. You can also use the end surface of a flat file. So I would start just at one of the lines and work it down, and then turn it around and go the other side. Like that. Now it is important that you go all the way down to the two marked lines, the 4.5 mil marked lines that we've got there. I'm actually going to continue it with this one. There we go. So now we need to do that with all of the other 3 holes. Okay, so I've now finished the 2 lifters. I'll just show you with a screw what I mean when I say we've got to have clearance for the button head. So if you can see here, the button head needs to be completely enveloped in that hole. This will actually be sliding up and down with 1/2 mil either side of it in the box, the main box of the machine. So we just need to have clearance to those edges. So that is pretty good. So I'll pop those there. I'm just going to bring these back in here. The glue's set now. I'm just going to put these little 6 mil flathead screws back in these two parts that look a little bit like bats. So the way that this is going to be assembled is that that'll be a top bracket, and that slots into the machine, and this is a bottom bracket, and that slots into the machine as well. If these are a little bit loose, which these ones are, we'll just put a little bit of tape around the edge there to hold them in place firmly. But there's our Z-axis, or the makings of our Z-axis rails. These are nicely stuck now, so that's good. The next thing to do is assemble our bearing carriages, and then we can work our little lead screws down and assemble the whole lot back together again.